Hi, welcome to my presentation. This is Rita Zhang, and my research title is Aleph Borjas and Simulation. So a little bit about me. My past experience at IMA is mainly about immersive storytelling, digital preservation of collective memory, and game design, game cultural business study. And this experience brought me to my research focus on studying the connections between the Argentina writer Borges' work and one of the most common concepts we have met in this age, which is Web 3.0. So as you can see in my presentation in the first part, I'm going to introduce the connections I found between the concept of simulation in Borges' work and the idea of simulation in Web 3.0. And the second part of my research focuses on the limitations and the issues around simulation, especially the perfect simulation in Web 3.0. And the third part, I would like to introduce my approach using game studies concept to connect and reflect on the issues of perfect simulation. So here comes the first part, building connections between simulations in Borges' work and the idea of simulation in Web 3.0. Some background information about Borges. He was an Argentina writer, mainly lives in the past 20th century with numerous contributions to the realm of literature. Many of his works deals with themes of time, infinity, mirrors, labyrinth. In the Garden of Forking Path, where there exists a garden of time that in every instance, there are infinite possible course of action, one follows another, like which we know nowadays is parallel universe. And he also have the very short story, which name called Exactitude in Science, where there is a one-to-one ratio map for an empire, so that the map is a country itself, which brings us to the concept of simulation and infinity. And the idea of simulation has inspired many artists, including the director Charlie Kaufman, who created a story of Synecdoche, New York. Someone creates a life-size replica of New York City. William Gibson says Borges is a master of using this concept and in writing. So when it comes to simulation, I focus on the text Aleph in Borges' work, which has the story that someone found the Aleph in the basement, and the Aleph is a point in the space that contains all other points. Anyone who gazes into it can see everything in the universe from every angle simultaneously. So when I look into this text, I intuitively felt this is so relevant to the idea of simulation in the Web 3.0 era, where we wish to have very strong computational powers, try to blur the boundaries between reality and the virtual world. But I know I need to find more support, as the writer Borges, he actually lives in the age like before the real application of World Wide Web. So like, how do I really make connections? I try to go back to the key books talking about virtual reality first. The computer graphic pioneer Ivan Sutherland uses the term Alice Wonderland to imagine the future that we have very strong computational power to simulate everything. While similarly, Jenna Murray, she wrote an influential book, Hamlet on the Holodeck, to discuss VR and how we create immersive experiences, those featuring a kind of submersion in the digital world. After that, I try to find more support on analysis of Borges' work by those modern critics. One recent book, Borges 2.0, mentions connections between the decentralized internet and Borges' works. Well, another story with the interesting name Cy Borges talks more systematically on various concepts from Borges' text and how it is related to science and technology and the virtual world. Author John Vondra, he uses the Borges tale at the beginning of his book, like about drawing a one-to-one ratio map. And I found this very interesting that it builds connections between Borges' work and the idea of simulation, but cannot keep thinking about the gap to reach what Ivan Sutherland or Jenny Murray took talked about the perfect simulation. Like people make jokes on Facebook, on Meta, that this is the horizon world they are building. Well, sometimes people facing this kind of issue, they just use the way of finding a god and the god solves everything, which is called the god from the machine. I sometimes feel that the idea of post-human from catering health is also kind of like creating a god from the machine. And then the very smart post-human just solves every problem we face in creating the perfect simulation. I still have the weird question that what if we don't have the god from the machine? What are we gonna to create in the simulation? So here comes my third part about introducing the ludologist approach about game studies to, to identify the gap and try to bridge the gap. So one of the most famous term in game studies is called the magic circle, where we have a playground-like space that separates us from the outside world. And the reason it is separated is because we have rules. This idea about the rules is kind of in line with like why I'm gonna use the game studies approach. We utilize the limited resources to create experience with like imperfect simulation. And also one of my favorite Chinese WeChat blog for game studies also writes that technology also only describes how the game is possible, but a game design finds the approach on how it works. What are we gonna to create in the imperfect simulation? And I found really interesting work from Professor Jesper Juul, who is also the founding member of NYU Game Center, that he wrote the book Half Real. And actually, he also talks about his understanding of the metaverse in his most recent video game essay. And there is no universal metaverse, which tries to break our common understanding of those perfect simulation or the ultimate display. That his ideas are virtual worlds are advertised as perfect technological recreation of regular world. That's the like common understanding of simulation, and he thinks that we experience the virtual world with subjective or expressive feelings that actually like it's the imperfect simulation gives us experience. This is my next step about like digging into the imperfect simulation and using the ludologist approach to like really combine the concept of simulation in Borges' work with the idea of metaverse itself, and also how the imperfect simulation is related to Borges' work in Aleph, that his understanding of simulation. So this is basically my research progress update, and thank you for your time.